My time.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Yep. Okay, we're on the hour, which means good morning, good night, good afternoon, everybody. This is the Registration Protocol Extensions Working Group in the IETF. My name is Antoine van Schuren, and together with my co-chair, Jim, I will try to make this session work. Next slide, please, Jim. So first of all, of course, our note well. I understand everybody read this. This is about what all the things that we say in this working group, and it has some notes there also on harassment and the way we deal with intellectual property in the IETF. I advise everybody to read it and to adhere to it. Next slide, please. So this is our agenda. It's quite full. We will have some progress discussions, and we will have quite some new work to be presented too. Next, please, Jim. So we want to tell everybody that we don't need a JabberScribe this time with Meet Echo. Jim and I will take care of the JabberScribe. We have a note scribe, Alexander Meyerhoven. Thank you very much, Alex, for doing that. I believe that will go all well. The note well we just discussed, and we have always a steady item on our agenda, which is document management and special attention to document shepherds. We wish to thank everybody that volunteers to be a document shepherd. As you are all aware, we are a small working group, and we have the process where we choose our document shepherds early in the process, meaning that if you want to have a document adopted, we ask you to look around in this working group for volunteers to be a document shepherd. The work of a document shepherd is mostly procedural, meaning that even though you don't know any very deep technical details of a certain draft, you will be asked to guide that draft through our working group. And it is a very good opportunity for newcomers in the working group to learn about the IETF procedures and processes. And I think that since we are doing that early on in the process, it works very well. And so a thank you to everybody who volunteers to be a document shepherd. And of course, the chairs will always guide people that want to become a document shepherd, so don't worry if you don't understand anything about the procedures yet. Next slide, please, Jim. So again, on our agenda, we're going to see which documents we produced. Next slide. So we published one document since the last IETF meeting, which is the login security extensions for EPP. It's RFC 8807. And well, thank you everybody who contributed to this. We have got some work done. Next slide, please, Jim. Status, next. So these are documents which are past our working group last call. A short summary of the status of most of them. The registry data escrow specification and the domain name registration data objects mapping documents. I want to discuss those both at the same time because they sort of like go together. And while the data escrow document is already in alt 48 state at the RFC editor, there's still a discuss on the DNRD objects mapping document. and we're in the process with the IESG and the document authors to get that resolved so that they can be published together.
So, hold on.
Yes.
Filling that in, no, actually, Friday, the RFC editor published RFC 8909.
Okay.
So I sent a note to them today at you guys' request to try to get them to hold off publication until object mapping was ready, but it turns out they had already published it a few days ago.
Okay, so the authors also didn't take that into account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Okay, I don't think it will be a big problem.
Anybody who reads it right now, it won't make much sense to them until object mapping is out, but it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, they didn't need any consecutive RFC numbers, I believe, so that won't be a problem. Okay. Thank you. I think that was Barry.
I should have said Barry Leva.
Then the ICANN trademark clearinghouse functional specification. Last IETF meeting, we decided that this document is going to the independent stream process, and very generously wanted to have a discussion with the document authors, which is Gustavo. This is the last time we will put this on the agenda. It's off our milestone list. I think everything that the working group needed to do here in helping with this document has been done. So if anybody still has any questions, we're happy to help in this working group, but we're not going to put it on our milestones anymore. What the Regext working group is concerned, the work for this document has been done. Then the RDAP partial response that's currently in IESG evaluation. Next slide, please, Jim.
Barry, you came off mute. You want to talk, Barry?
No, I'm just go on. I'm just preparing because I probably will. But go ahead.
And the same is true for the sorting and paging document. These two sort of like came together and they passed working group last call. There's a document shepherd write-up and it is submitted to the IESG and we're waiting for their feedback.
Right. So I believe both of them have no discusses on them. I'm waiting for the shepherds to let me know whether the versions that are current are ready to go. So if you guys think that sorting and paging and partial response are ready, I will give them a final check and do the approval.
Yes, because these documents came back to the working group, mostly for language issues.
Right.
Which we corrected with the help of Scott. Thank you again, Scott, for that. So, okay, we will ask the document shepherd to give a final verification that the current version.
Whatever the status is, let me know so I know what to do next. Because I think apart from having the shepherd tell me something, I think it's in my action. So I need to know what action you're expecting from me.
Okay, then we will sort that out, Jim. We will talk to that about that after the meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Then there's 7482 bis and 7483 bis. These two are actually waiting for me. The document shepherds have done their write-up with the help of us, and we're very grateful about that. And basically, this is just a action waiting for me. But in the week before the IETF, I had little time to do the submission, and probably the ADs are busy during the IETF week as well. So this will be submitted this week, or at least at the beginning of the next week. Any questions about those? Nope. And then we have two documents that are waiting for the Shepherd write-ups, which is the secure auth info transfer and the EPP unhandled namespaces. We're waiting for the Shepherds to do their write-ups. One comment and or one question I have to ask about these last 4 documents, actually, because for 3 of these documents, we had to extend the working group last call. Now, the question that I have is we are a small working group, we realize that. Is our working group last call window of 2 weeks too small? Or is this just a coincidence and these documents needed to have some further time to adjust the documentation? It's just a remark from me, but I just noticed that, you know, for the past documents, we always had to extend the working group last call. For these documents, that was not an issue. But if it's a process issue from the chairs, then we would like to hear. Any remarks about those? If not, then we will continue to. You have something to say, Jim?
Actually, I have a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think it's natural. I think for a couple of these, there was just late, detailed feedback that came back from the working group that needed to be worked out. So I don't think they need to be extended from 2 weeks to 3 weeks or some longer period of time. But I also wanted to point out one additional item on the unhandled namespaces is that I did make an update based on the working group last call, and I'm encouraging the working group to take a look at those updates, specifically in adding the implementation considerations section based on feedback from Thomas Court. So as you're looking at these, please take a look at that update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Well, and as a remark back, you know, it could also be that we are calling out the working group last call too early, right? When there has not been enough review being done during the normal working group time that we have for the documents. And it could also be that that's why we get a lot of remarks that still have to be implemented in the document during the working group last call. So actually, this is a question from me to everybody in the working group that to please review documents before we put them into working group last call. Okay, thank you. Then next slide, please, Jim. And this is where you take over from me.
Okay, thanks, Antoine. And this is the last comment and discussion is kind of a nice segue into this particular document. It unfortunately found itself in a place where we had some interesting discussion during the working group last call that, again, we've said a few times, we know we're a small group. And, you know, when you end up with just 2 people who are having a discussion, we really wanted to try and get some additional input. And we guess we didn't spark enough interest. So in this particular case, although we tried to extend the working group last call, we ended up just closing it and pulling the document back into the working group so that we could finish that discussion on the document. Now, Jody, I noticed your hand go up and then you pulled it away. I'm happy to let you jump in and say something if you want. Other than that, you know, the comment from the chairs on this document is we just need to finish that discussion. It was Jody and Jim Gould in particular that were having a little bit of a back and forth on some comments, and you know, nothing came of that. It just sort of ended there when we asked for other input. So this is an appeal to the group. Please go back, check out that thread, and add to it so that we can figure out what the consensus is on this document, and then we'll move it back into a last call and push it forward. So last chance, any comments from anyone about that, status of that document? Jim Gould, go ahead, please.
About doing late feedback, I apologize to the working group. When the working group last call came up, I decided to do a deep dive on this particular draft. So that's the result of the deep dive. But yeah, I encourage others in the working group to also do that kind of deep dive earlier in the process if possible.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. No worries. You know, the fact that you did comment and looked into it is certainly the most welcome part of all of that. You know, timing is just whatever it is. It's fine. So, okay. Rick Wilhelm, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Rick Wilhelm, for the record. On this particular one, I also have had some separate conversations with some folks on that I would say are approaching this a little bit more from the business side, not just the technical side. And I'm going to be, and I'll either do this on my own or with Gould, but put in some comments here. One of the things that I'll bring up, just to not have there be any suspense about it, is that these maintenance notifications have at times a contractual need to be accomplished, and there are different ways in which notifications can be sent, either email, as folks know, or now, of course, we're considering doing this by EPP. And so when it comes to this perhaps fulfilling a contractual need, I think that we'll need to discuss if it does that just due to the way that the maintenance notification process would work via the pull queue, because if a registry is notifying another party by the pull queue, it's unclear exactly when that is going to, if that's going to satisfy the business requirement also. So I think that's something that we'll need to, I'll try and work to bring that up in a comment. I just wanted to state it here to give a little bit of a preview. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rick. I'll channel Antoine a little bit here and just, make a comment for us. Antoine and I often have this discussion about, ICANN requirements or not ICANN requirements. We do need to be a little careful just to keep separate any policy considerations from technical considerations, that kind of thing. I mean, I do appreciate what you're after here. Poll messages are handled very differently, typically asynchronously from the synchronous communication that our policies typically require. But we should certainly examine whether or not that's an issue for this this specification or not. So thanks for that. Okay. Moving on, let's move into existing work presentations. We actually have quite a lot that we have now moved on from and passed along. So yay for us. Pretty awesome success for us this year, in spite of the world pandemic and our virtual nature that we have here going. So we have two presentations set up for today. The RDAP reverse search capabilities. Search is certainly important stuff in RDAP for a variety of reasons, and this work has been languishing for a long time. But Mario, I believe you're ready to step up and help us try to invigorate this work a bit. Would you like me to put up your slides for you, or did you want to present, Mario?
You can roll the slides for me.
Okay, here we go. And over to you.
Okay, thank you. This is a very short presentation about the status of reverse search in RDAP draft. Please go to the next slide. The first slide about the changes, most relevant changes made since last meeting. I reorganized the abstract in order to rearrange the content to consider reverse search not only based on the domain entity relationship, and I added 2 sections to define the ARDA conformance value reverse search to signal conformance with this specification as suggested by Scott in the working group mailing list. Next slide, please. The other 2 slides are about the evolution of regulatory context of registry data, and I put these slides to inform the working group about the direction that towards which the European Union is moving about the provisioning of unpublic WIS data, registry data. The first proposal made by the European Union is the e-evidence, the electronic evidence. The goal is to make it easier and faster for police and judicial authorities like Europol to access the electronic evidence. So the authorities should be able to access some public registry data without submitting written requests, and this proposal was scheduled to become a European Union directive at the end of this year, but is expected to become European Union directive or regulation, I think, the next year. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. Another example of how the European Union registries are moving to provide access to unpublic data is the cooperation between national authorities and central registries. Authorities normally request registry to access unpublic registry data for legitimate interest under a cooperation agreement, and registry should provide authorities with fast access to those data. So some national regulations are currently being reviewed to meet this requirement. The goal of these 2 proposals is to provide authorities with fast access and authenticated access to registry data through obviously registry data discovery services. So I think that this proposal goes in the same direction of the goal of the reverse search draft. So I think that reverse search is furtherly justified by the evolution and the progress of this proposal, at least within the European Union countries. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Mario. Appreciate very much you stepping in to bring this work back forward again. One general comment from me, you know, I think that being able to search in RDAP is a pretty significant feature that we do need to understand, you know, how to make that, how to set that up to make that happen. The RDAP spec certainly has some indications of searching, but I think a more full and complete specification for how to do that really is what's needed within RDAP. I'd like to encourage folks here to please get involved in this discussion, especially those of us who are involved, you know, on the ICANN side. There's a lot of work going on the ICANN side with respect to whether or not search should be present or not and what that means. So it'd be very good to have a technical understanding of what's possible so that we can continue that discussion on that side. And with that, Scott, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Jim. Scott Hollenbeck here. I'm generally not a fan of reverse search because I think that, there are some very significant privacy concerns associated with this kind of capability. However, as we've discussed in chat, given appropriate access control, client identification, client authorization capabilities, I think those kinds of concerns can be mitigated. And so I think what I'm going to suggest is that I've been sitting on my federated authentication draft for a bit, primarily because of a lack of progress in the ICANN space that Jim was just describing. But if we have a use case here for which that kind of technology, could be very useful, this may be the one that we use to kind of move that document forward at the same time. So just a thought.
Thank you, Scott. And of course, as you know, documents nowadays have a spot, and we talked about this before in this working group, although we never came to any conclusion about it. But there is an opportunity for a privacy consideration section in a document, and that would be something that we should just consider how to fill that out in this document. That becomes one of the more important elements that maybe if we can cover that, we can cover this issue. And then, as you say, I like the idea that maybe it's the motivation to bring the OpenID stuff forward. I want to see if, I guess Mario went away. I don't know if you want to add any comments in here, Mario. But Alex, you have your hand up for now. Go ahead.
Thank you.
No other comments for me.
Thank you, Mario. The one point I want to spell out is we're currently working on implementing an RDAP prototype for .at, and what I'm using now is plain changing web tokens, so it's not full-blown OpenID, but I certainly note that we need some kind of scalable authorization infrastructure if we give that to third parties. Let me put it that way very carefully.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Ulrich, go ahead, please. Ulrich, if you're speaking,
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Hello, yeah, I just want, this is Ulrich from the Swedish Registry. I wanted to say that Mario has actually done the privacy consideration part. And because we have had this discussion here in the group quite often, and I think so the document has improved from that part. I would actually ask, how do we know that this is a good privacy consideration? Is there any other group that we could ask? I mean, if we would say for security, if we would do some encryption, we would probably ask the crypto forum or the security, some security group to take a look. So how do we do this with privacy considerations?
So thank you for that question, Ulrich. I wonder if maybe we can put our AD on the spot here and ask. I have to say that I don't think that I've seen any significant privacy consideration section, at least myself, in having looked through documents, nothing that's crossed my desk, if you will, has one.
Step in, Jim.
You have something, yeah, go ahead.
The Human Rights Protection Group that had its original comments for this document. They were the ones that opposed this document because they saw a lot of privacy considerations, obstacles for this document. Now, their work was mostly about trying to get this document not published because they didn't like the idea at all, where we asked them that they could help write a sufficient privacy considerations section. So I guess we can ask them again to review the privacy considerations section, while what the document for the rest describes is actually how to do reverse search and not when to do reverse search.
And just a comment on privacy considerations sections. So there was an IAB document some years ago that discussed privacy issues and recommended that that you might include a privacy consideration section if there were significant privacy issues that needed to be covered. There's no requirement to have a privacy consideration section, and most documents, as Jim noted, don't. But if a lot of issues have been raised, it would be good to have a good privacy consideration section that they can review. So yeah, I think the best answer is to go back to them, discuss the issues again, and decide what to say in the document. You're probably not going to make them happy, but at least if the issues that were raised are documented and addressed, the IASG is not likely to balk.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you for that, Barry. And I want to call out in the chat, Ali Hussein had noted the internet draft from the HRPC, some guidelines from them. So that should be something we should also make a point of checking out carefully to try and move this document along. As Antoine said, we had quite some discussion from the human rights folks early on. And yeah, maybe we just have to press on that and draw a consensus from our group here and do the best we can to simply address the concerns. Let's see, Ulrich, I think that's an old hand. So Alex, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, obviously reverse search is very privacy sensitive, and we all know that, even though we are just engineers, so to say, we have a strong privacy understanding, I would say. So, but on the other hand, as you said, this is a technical specification. So I think that we should point out that there are significant privacy implications on providing reverse search. Yes, but I believe that there is no need to say in a technical document you must follow the law, because that's quite obvious. And what we could say is maybe that, yeah, this is obviously highly privacy relevant, and implementers must, not just should, yeah, but must consider legal implications, yeah, as easy as that, and must follow the local privacy law. I mean, I do believe that we can't fix any problems that the lawmakers have introduced in those directions. Yeah? But it would be, at a minimum, as engineers, we should say that, hey, we got concerns here. This is a sensitive topic. You must address this before you actually put out your registration data on the internet. I don't know whether that's in line with the IAB document that Barry mentioned before, but I think that would be sort of like a generic strategy to address that. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. You know, in terms of being in line with the IAB document, you know, what I heard from Barry, I think, you know, probably the most important guidance for us is whatever questions are raised, we should just speak to them. The privacy consideration section should at least say something about the questions that are being raised by the human rights folks. And that might be the best that we can do. And you know, that's the path that we should look for. And of course, make sure that we are completing anything that might be in the IAB document. So, okay, Ulrich, you're going to get the last word here. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Yes, I just want to say, of course, I think we discussed this a few meetings back, that just saying follow the law isn't enough. And Mario fixed it in the document, because I think what we should point out is, where are the privacy problems? Because not every reverse search is a privacy problem, but specific versions of reverse search are privacy problems. And if we point out these problems, and people have some pointers of where to start investigating what they should do and can do. And I think that is what is asked of us.
So thank you for that, Ulrich. I like that. It would probably be especially helpful if you would, you know, take a look at the document and what's there, and bring that comment and that question to bear on your review of the document, and say something on the mailing list about that. That would be very helpful to us. I agree with you. So, okay. With that, I think we're a little bit behind schedule here. Not a lot. We do have a few minutes at the end, so we're okay. Let's move on to our next presentation here, simple registration reporting. Joseph, you are out there. Do you want to jump in here? Let me bring your slides up for you.
Thanks, Jim. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly. Go ahead, please.
Awesome. I still remember my last time. Okay. Thanks, everyone. This is the simple registration reporting. This is about the standardized set of report that registry can provide for registrar, so that we have a consistent expectations of what being produced and how register consume. Next slide. Not well. Thanks. The draft status was discussed in last IETF and being adopted, and the latest version 02, was recently published at November 2nd. That one is mainly focused on expanding the IANA registries on how to register the fields and the reports definitions. Next slide. We still have the open questions from the last versions, mainly about the column headings, whether they can be ignored, and if we allow the unrecognized column headers can be in part of the report. Next slide. And this one is using one of the report to demonstrate whether one of the fields can be mandatory or optionals. This is also the discussion we have from the last version as well. Next. So I just talk about this, whether the columns and also this list of the current reports in the draft being documented, and there's open questions of whether there be more reports we need to add to it. Next, James, you have a questions?
Oh, Jim Gould, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, actually, I kind of reverse what your question is. Actually, I'd like to see less reports in the draft, because I like the draft to be focused on the framework and not on the actual concrete reports. So if you wanted to find IANA registry around the fields and the reports and the process for updating IANA registry, that's fine. So that'd be focused on the framework. But the specific reports, I think, will be very difficult to get consensus on, and that gets to my second feedback item, is the track of this draft, because right now I guess it's defined as informational. I'm not sure that's because of the fact that it has concrete reports, or is there another reason why it's not standards track? So, thank you.
Okay. We can absolutely bring that to working group if we want to talk more about the splitting the framework, but so I don't have the answer. I would love to actually get more feedback from the working group on that.
So let me add one quick comment as a co-author here with Joseph. I think that structurally, if we want to split this into two documents where the framework is one and the initial document specification, the initial report specification is a separate document. I think that would that seems fine to me. If anybody has any objections to that, it'd be good to hear that. That'd be something to think about. I think that's one response to Jim Gould's thing. More directly to the question of the status of this document, actually, that would be a question at the end of this thing. You know, I do actually, I agree with you, Jim Gould. Well, you didn't actually say this, but speaking for myself, I was actually thinking this document should go to standards track. Certainly the framework should be standards track. The actual reports, maybe not. So maybe that's another reason for splitting the document. I think that it was just an artifact of how we started, that we made it informational to start with. But I think a fair question at the end of this presentation for the working group to think about is confirming that it would be good to move this to standard track, at least the framework. So that's an open question, interested in hearing from folks. With that, Alex, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jim. There was one question in the draft about the empty values. I think that's a problem of the output format. Quite concretely for CSV, I would like to see empty columns. Yeah, for other formats that we might develop in the future, like or whatever, there are formats for that in the data format itself. For the second part, I agree with what you, Jims, have said. I think that having too many reports in the original framework draft would complicate the process. Let me put it that way. And I also agree that the framework itself should probably be standards track. And then we are pretty free to define whatever reports we have in informational documents, or maybe if I don't know what the registry policy is at the moment, if it is just specification required, then other folks like ICANN working groups can pretty much define their own reports and register them with IANA without the need to go through the RFC process if it's just specification required. So I think that would be a valuable extension of that mechanism.
Joseph, any comments, or should I move on to the queue?
Yeah, we're absolutely get noted about the empty value discussion. So that would be the open questions. We'll absolutely have more discussion on the next revisions and in the working group as well. So yes, next slide.
No, you still have a hand up. Jim Gould, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry.
Draft was quote split, and the base draft was the framework and standards track. That would make a lot of sense. And actually, to go off of what Alex said, having to create a draft for the actual reports may not be necessary at all. Hopefully the framework would enable the registration of reports without having to go through a draft. So thank you.
So I'll offer a quick response to that. The current way this thing is defined is a first come first served registry with specification required. So it doesn't have to be an internet draft or RFC, but there does have to exist a specification for the report and for any data elements that might be defined also. That's similar to the way the EPP extensions and RDAP extensions registry was done. You know, it doesn't make sense to have something if you don't have a specification for it somewhere, although it doesn't necessarily have to be an IETF document. Go ahead, Jim, and then we should let Joseph continue here.
I think that's the right way to go.
Thank you. Back to you, Joseph.
Nope. Noted. So next slide. This is the way the IANA registry, on the version 2 of this draft, we focus on expanding how the registry works for the field names and the report names. It follows the guideline from the RFC A126. It will ask to develop a small pool of individuals to serve as the designated experts. That mirrors what we have for the EPP extensions right now. We propose to use the current Regext mailing list for the public discussion for any request. So that means the Regext mailing list will be asked to continue to be open and remain active even after the Regext working group close and conclude. So next slide.
Hold on, we have a question in the queue. Go ahead, Zadago. Zadago, if you're speaking, we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Right. I'd like to be part of this group, this document. The discussion on this document, I'd like to be part of it.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please. Ask your question.
So the question is, at the moment, there's a use case in the Apenic region where there is no one to represent a case like this one, whereby the registration should happen in concordance with the INA. There's no one who is in charge in Apenic to do this job.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand what your question is, Zadago.
There is a use case in Apenic, which is a regional registry for INA. So there's no one in charge of looking into this document. There's no representation of that registry into the discussion group.
Okay, so I think what Zadago means is that he wants to join the discussion. So the discussion takes place on the mailing list. And if you enter the discussion there and you want to be part of the expert group, then I think that's where that's being discussed. So if you want to join the discussion on the mailing list.
Okay. How do I join?
Thank you.
Okay, let's take your question to the chat room about how to join the mailing list, Zadago. We're beginning to run a little short on time here. I'll put a link to the mailing list subscription page in the chat room. Joseph, let's go back to you, please.
Okay, so next slide. And this is the example of how the column headings, the definitions, and in the registry wants to collect. And as Jim, you have mentioned before, the registration process is expected to be first come, first serve. Next slide. And this is the list, the example list of the name of the fields to be expected to be part of this draft to be registered. Next slide. And these are the next 4 slides is about the list of the current list of the heading, the column headers being document tracked, and the reports. This is the INA registry, the definitions. And also, again, the process is expected to be first come, first serve. Next slide. And I have the list of the report names and the fields related from the field definitions. Next. There's some topics related to this draft we have not been captured, and that will be open for discussions, especially about what should be the name for the report and what elements should be part of it. If the file is too large, will we do the splitting, or if we will do any compressions? Next slide. And another related is how the repository will be look like. Will it be one single directory, or they will be split by something similar like a dates, or the type of the report? And the last thing is what character will be used as a separator to split the view. And in the current draft, we found the CSV format as a guideline for the format. And next.
That's it.
That's it. And thanks everyone, and thanks for all the questions.
So one of the things we want to leave the group with here is the question of status of the framework. Certainly heard a discussion to split this document, so that's a good thing. There's also a question of a milestone date, which we're going to get to in just a moment, but we have a question about that too for this document. Jim Gould, do you have your hand up? Go ahead, please.
Fields or the full set of fields, you may want to look at the data escrow drafts as an example of the complete set of fields that are included in registries and domain name registries. So that may be a good reference point for what may be needed.
So just to speak to that directly, Jim, what we did was look at existing reports and chose to only include those list of elements, as opposed to trying to define all elements that might exist in registration data. So the idea being that you would only define elements that exist in reports that are being used. We could certainly choose a different path, which you're suggesting. We could do that if folks think that that's more helpful. And in that case, we might even just go back to the data mapping document that was mentioned earlier and refer to that. But anyway, go ahead. You want to respond to that?
Kind of scenario. So if you're going to focus on the framework, you may want to provide a base set of fields. It may not be like every field that's defined within data escrow or the data mapping. But a good set of fields that are independent of the concrete reports that you're aware of.
Okay. Certainly something to think about. I'm happy to expand the list if that's what folks would like.
Yeah, same here, Jim. Just happy to look to see, but I don't remember offhand if auth-info will be part of it. That's something that we mentioned in the version 02 of the draft. Anything related to privacy or security related, we take a cautious approach.
Yeah, and Gavin Brown in the chat room, just to call out for the record here, is also pointing out that there was an inventory of registration data elements that fed into the development of RDAP itself. So we do have a couple of choices here. If we want to expand the list of potential data elements just to have a baseline for use by all reports, we could certainly explore that if that's what folks think would be more helpful in this document. We can certainly do that. So we'll take that discussion to the mailing list here and see what folks want to do. Putting on a chair hat here, I think it's important to draw a line under this discussion at this point and move on. We're kind of running out of time here. So let me get back and say thank you, Joseph. Let's get back to our chair slides here so we can see where we are and move to the next thing here, which I believe is a discussion of, now we're going to have a little presentation about some new work before we talk about milestones. So we have a number of items that are in front of us and available to us to think about for new work. We have some presentations that go with some of these, but not all of them. In fact, the first one up here is the Unrenew extension from Jody. And so we have some time allotted here for discussion about these things. Jody, did you want to jump in here and get us started on the Unrenew extension?
Absolutely. Can you hear me all right, Jim?
Yes, please, go ahead.
All right. I'm sorry, I don't have any slides for this. And I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. I know I have 20 minutes, but we're running a little bit behind. Quoc Pham and us from GoDaddy Registry and I have been working on a way to do to undo an explicit renewal without deleting the domain. We will have a paper coming out, or submitting a paper that we hope can be adopted. I'll just go through the history of it first and the issues that we see. In order to receive a refund for a registration of a domain, the domain must be deleted within the registration grace period. Now, this seems to make sense because the customer may misspell the domain name, and then they only have 5 days after the domain's been created to delete the domain. There's not much to be gained by the registrant in gaming the system, and it seems to make sense. It's pretty logical. In order to receive a refund for a domain that has been auto-renewed by the registry, the registrant needs to delete the domain. Again, this makes sense as a customer has been able to use the domain name for the entire registration lifecycle, and they are nearing the end of they are at the end of the registration lifecycle. Usually the domain auto-renews at the end of that. So the customer has actually paid for, a complete year. The domain name renews at the end of that year, or auto-renews at the end of that year, and then the customer has 45 days. And in order to get money back for that auto-renewal, the registrant needs to delete the domain name, the registrant and the registrar. Now, for an explicit renewal, which would only happen, it's a manual renewal, not an auto-renewal by the registry. An explicit renewal is sent by the registrar, and it can be sent at any time during the domain name lifecycle. But one of the issues that we've come across is that if a customer comes in and they renew the domain name in the middle of their registration lifecycle, let's say they've registered the domain name for 1 year, and they come in 6 months into that year, and they renew the domain name, and then realize they've done it accidentally. They either renewed the wrong domain name, they've renewed it for too many years, etc. But they are not able to remove the excess years or the renewal years that they've renewed the domain name for unless they delete the domain name. When they delete the domain name, they will lose the registration lifecycle that they've actually paid for. They'll lose the last 6 months of that lifecycle, and in that time they could have been using the domain name for email, to build a business, to put a website on, etc. And now the domain will have to be deleted in order for them to recapture their renewal periods. Now, there's various reasons how this can happen. One of them, I think, that we've all probably experienced is a bad internet connection. If you've ever gotten to a cart and you put in your credit card, you've hit the submit button, and all of a sudden it hangs. The website hangs, you lose your connection, etc. And then we're not sure if whatever you've purchased has been completed. This can happen to registrants, and what will happen is they'll immediately freak out about it, and they'll come in and they'll try to purchase it again. In some cases, the renewal could have actually gotten to the registrar. The registrar has already submitted the renewal to the registry, but unbeknownst to the customer, they come in and get nervous and renew it again. This can happen multiple times. In order to get back the money that they've had, if they've only wanted 1 renewal and they wound up sending 6 renewals or a 5-year renewal, etc., they would have to delete that domain name in order to get it back. They're not willing to delete the domain name and forego the rest of their registration life cycle on that. We've had this happen many times. Another issue could be with interfaces. Customers could renew the domain name for 10 years when they were really only wanted to renew it for 1 year. Another issue is, as much as I'd like to believe that developers are perfect, they are not, and developers may institute something that's renewing domain names for the incorrect number of years, and there's no way to back that out. Now, as far as the first issue goes, as a registrar, we've had many calls with customers trying to explain to them that we're sorry, but in order to get your the renewal funds back, they would have to delete the domain name. This has led to a lot of extreme customer dissatisfaction, and in some cases, we've had to just refund the registration or the renewals to the customer in order to keep a happy customer, but we would eat the cost of the renewals at the registry.
the way that we would see an unrenew command would work is that what we've discussed is adding an unrenew extension to the renewal command. The unrenew would be time bound. It could only be done within the renewal grace period. And so it would usually, that's 5 days, but I know different CCTLDs have different restrictions for that. A successful domain renewal unrenewal request will result in the renewal charge being refunded. The unrenew does not apply to auto renewals. Registrars are provided 45 days in an auto renewal grace period to delete the domain name, and the domain is at the end of the life cycle, like I said, and it shouldn't bother the customer to delete that domain name at that time. We would see the actual unrenew working as a queue. Basically, if a customer comes in and let's just say they submit 5 one-year renewals over and over and over again, it would then take 5 unrenews commands to back those 5 years out if that's what they wanted to do. The reason that we would do this is we would not want to send, let's just say in that previous example, a customer had renewed it 5 times for 5 years. We wouldn't want to be able to say, let's send it an unrenew command for just 2 of those years. What we found in discussions is that it helps the accounting department to be able to line up, an unrenew command with a renew command to determine when costs have been backed out. There are other things to consider here too. Is like, how could a renew command, an unrenew command, be gamed? How could an unrenew command should it unwind the renewals that set the expiration date in the past? I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. An unrenew command should never unwind renewal commands that set the expiration dates in the past. For example, you should not be able to take away renewal years and then suddenly the expiration date is 2 years in the past. That just should not be done. And then obviously the unrenewed command should only be allowed within the explicit renewal grace period. And then there are going to be other registry policy considerations and I believe ICANN policy considerations also. I know I went through that pretty quick, but that's my presentation. Any thoughts?
So thanks, Jody. You have a question from Jim Reed in the chat room before the queue here, where he asks about, is unrenew an EPP issue or something to be fixed in the registry's business logic?
That's a good question. A registry could implement an unrenew by allowing a customer or a registrar to call in and say, hey, I'd like to unrenew 3 of these 10-year domain renewals that I just sent in. An EPP command is something that we would see to be an advantage because we see thousands of these a month. I mean, it is quite it's a very big problem for us. And sending 1,000 emails to the registry to unrenew those domains, I don't think it's something that we want to do.
Okay, thanks. Gavin, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, so thank you, Jody, for talking about this this idea. I had a few things I wanted to just bring to the attention of everyone on this in the meeting. First one is that there is actually prior art for this. I believe the Nominate registry system has an unrenew command. I don't know, or did. I think it was pre-EPP, but I'm pretty sure that existed. So there is at least one registry of reasonable scale that is offering this service. My experience it is very similar to Jody's in that we quite regularly see issues like this happening, and there are often legitimate reasons why this happens. I mean, where this happens, where people do things in good faith that come out with an effect that they hadn't anticipated. One example of that would be where someone renews a domain during the auto renew grace period, not being aware of the fact that the domain has auto renewed. And I wanted to raise that as an additional use case. Thirdly, I don't know, Jody, do you have any actual text around this? Do you have a draft that's in the works for this? Because about 5 years ago, I actually published a draft called the reverse extension, which was more general purpose than an unrenew, and was a general framework to allow an EPP client to request that a previous command that it submitted be reversed in some way. That the main use case was to reverse an accidental renewal, but was designed to be more general in that the client could specify any previous command that it submitted using the transaction ID, the client transaction ID, and then request the server to reverse that command, and then get a notification if they had done so through the message queue. So if you don't have a document that you would like to push through, then that draft that I wrote back in 2015 might be a good basis for future work.
Thanks, Gavin. I appreciate that. I didn't know there was a previous work on that, but we have been working on a document that we've been passing back and forth. But I would love to take a look at that if you have a link to that, or is that in the IETF somewhere?
I just posted a link to it in the chat.
Excellent, thanks.
And before we go to Alex, Jay Daly also put in the chat a pointer to UK's unrenew command, just to call out for folks to take a look at to understand. Alex, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make a clarifying question. Jody, do you imagine that you can do a multi-year renewal, like 5 years, and then you can unrenew a single out of those years? Because I believe the more options there are, the complicated that gets, and our registries are essentially like navigating a set of icebergs already, and every change makes the business logic more complicated, like decrease our chances that everything works together smoothly. So I would strongly oppose that you can like split existing commands into individual years they unrenew.
Thanks for the question, Alex. We had discussed that, and being able to say if you renew the domain name for 10 years and then sending an unrenew for like 3 years of those 10 years so that you would have a 7-year renewal. We decided, as you said, that just got too complicated on the registry side to implement, and it did lead to some business logic and some accounting principles that we weren't comfortable with. That's why we decided that it would be best, and looking for feedback on this, if the unrenew command just undid the previous renewal, the most recent previous renewal. So as I said, if a customer came in and let's just say they did a 1-year renewal followed by a 2-year renewal followed by a 3-year renewal for some reason, the first unrenew command would undo the 3-year renewal. The second unrenew command would undo the 2-year renewal, and then the third one would undo the 1-year renewal, just to keep everything in a queue, and then it would just undo the previous actual renewal, regardless of how many years it was. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yes, indeed, it does. I mean, unrolling the queue itself is not a fun problem to address itself. So my reference would be that only the last renew command could be reversed. But well, yeah. I see my developer cringe as soon as I say, well, you have to keep a queue of renewal commands that you can reverse in order. But anyways, yeah. I understand your business logic, and it doesn't help you if you can only unrenew the last one. It can't renew.
Thanks, Alex. I think that maybe that could be part of our registry option, I guess, or a server option. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Alex. And Rick, you're going to get the last word here, and then we have to move on to keep up with our agenda.
Thank you, Jim. Rick Wilhelm. So one, I agree with the previous comment that you made, Jody, about not doing a partial unrenew. That from a business and accounting and report and standpoint, that sounds like a real headache. So plus one of that. Overall, the unrenew is very interesting, and I think has a lot of potential to be very useful. The challenge though that I see in this is that this is really heavily dependent on the business rules, and something to which Jim Reed alluded, brought up in chat, and Alex also kind of brought up, and I think, and the issue there is that at least for most for GTLD registries, which are a large part of the use case for this is going to have to go through a fair bit of ICANN policy related work, I think, in order for it to get traction. And so I think that we need to be mindful of that as we go forward, because then later that, when at least if it goes forward, the wording in the document is flexible in order to accommodate what goes on in that policy work. Because while, you know, I agree with what Jim said, is that this shouldn't be sort of the ICANN standardization mechanism. This does operate in a inside of a context, and that context is has a lot of business rules, and not the least of which, and some of the complicated ones around here, relate to reporting requirements, and also there's fees that get charged and things like that. So I think that that's something that, if the draft does go forward, we'll have to take into account, and then for it to actually take root in the GTLD space, there have to be ICANN policy work, I believe, done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. I was trying to keep the 4-letter acronym out of here, but I agree. We had discussed whether an RSERP would have to be, or an RSEP would have to be done for this. And yes, I'm not blind to the fact that this could cause a lot of issues with ICANN and how it could be implemented. But I appreciate the feedback. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jody. We look forward to moving on with this. So we'll move on to the next item in our new work here, the JS contact in RDAP. This is something we actually, I don't know if we had the discussion here in this group before, but it certainly has been presented in other registration fora. But over to you, Gavin. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah. I was going to, the first thing I was going to say is that many of you may have been introduced to this topic at the registration operations workshop. So as a result of that, I'm trying not to kind of cover too much of the same ground. Obviously, the reason why Mario and I are bringing this to the Regext group this IETF meeting is because we're asking for it to be considered for adoption by the working group. So I'm just going to give a précis of this draft at a high level, so that that consideration can take place. So if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide. I think anyone in this room who has worked with RDAP would probably agree that the use of JCard to represent contact information is one of the biggest sources of pain from an implementation point of view, whether you're a server implementer or a client implementer. JCard, for those who need reminding or are not familiar with it, is a transliteration or a conversion of vCard, which is those little .vcf files that you get that are sort of digital business cards, into JSON. And because it's a attempt to kind of losslessly convert vCard into JSON, the resulting JSON syntax is extremely unwieldy, essentially because it's almost to the point of it's a machine interpretation rather than a human readable representation. Mario has done some research. I wasn't able to provide a reference to this, but I'm sure Mario will be able to, that something, at least more than half of all of the RDAP records for the NIC zones in the GTLD space contain at least one JCard error. So even I'd say a majority of TLD operators are unable to correctly construct a JCard object. And that clearly means that there are serious challenges in interoperability, in maintainability, and just in the doing the work of implementing JCard in RDAP servers. And so, looking at alternative options, one that comes to mind is JS Contact, which provides a simpler and more efficient representation of contact information. So, next slide, please. JS Contact is a draft that's being developed separately from this draft, and it's part of an overall effort to try and standardize RESTful interaction with productivity systems like email, calendaring, and address books. And we're making use of that work to make it available to RDAP implementations. It's a JSON native representation of contact data. It doesn't kind of it's not a compilation artifact in the way that JCard is. Sorry, I get confused. It also has a number of features that are either not available in JCard or are not easily implemented in JCard, particularly around unstructured contact information and internationalized contact information. And particularly on the internationalization front, there are long-term efforts taking place to make representation and access to internationalized registration data, which can be collected through EPP but is currently not available to any consumers. Make that available, and this provides a route to do that through RDAP. It's much easier for a client implementer to process. The structure of the JS card objects is much more logical. It's easier to access data elements because they're named rather than occupying a position in an indexed array. It is relatively straightforward to convert JCard into JS card and vice versa. Mario has a repository of tools which can allow this to take place. And you can see the identity of the draft that outlines this specification of JS Contact at the bottom bullet point. Next slide, please. So our draft provides a way for an RDAP server operator to go through a transition process from only using JCard in responses to only using JS card. Excuse me. The actual use of JS Contact or JS card objects in RDAP responses is very straightforward. You simply remove the vCard array from the entity object and replace it with a JS card object. So very little in the way of substantial changes to the RDAP responses themselves, other than one data element gets swapped out for another. But there is a need to signal to a client that a server does support JS card, and also a way to gracefully transition from the current state to the future state. So the document describes a transition process with 4 phases. The first phase obviously is the kind of current steady state where JCard is the only option. The second state makes JS card available optionally if a client sets a query parameter, and the server can indicate to clients that it supports JS card using a notice and also using the IDAP conformance array. The third stage would be to switch the default from JCard to JS card. And clients that still require the JCard can retrieve the JCard version of a response by setting a query parameter. So the default is switched between phases 2 and 3, and then the fourth phase, which I suppose is probably completely optional, and a server operator that wanted to offer both indefinitely could just not move to phase 4, would be to remove support for the query parameter to enable that allows the client to query for JCard. So a server operator may wish to completely remove support for JCard and get rid of all that code that they've got in their system to support that, or they could just leave things where they stand and allow JCard to be available indefinitely should they choose. The draft itself doesn't specify the duration of any of these phases, so that's again up to the server operator to decide whether they want to specify short, long, or very long phases between the different transition steps. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of metadata about the draft itself. We published the first version in March this year. There have been three subsequent revisions. There is some work still to do, but we kind of feel that the best place for that work to take place is within the working group now, because we really want to bring in as many stakeholders as possible to try and get some eyeballs onto this to hammer out the edge cases and the complexities. So this is why we're advancing it for consideration. We have one implementation currently available, which is in .it. They have that in their ILAP testbed system. And obviously we would look to get at least one more additional implementation and some client implementations as well, if possible. When I presented this at the Row, there was very positive feedback. I think very few people said that JCard was fun to work with, and I think that was positive and encouraging, and I think we need to harness that enthusiasm for an alternative as quickly as possible, so that we can get rid of JCard and everyone can get on with their jobs. So that's it really. If that's that's all I have to say. So questions.
Thanks, Gavin. So for the working group, this will be all of this new work, the presentation we're listening to here. The working group is going to have to consider if it wants to adopt the work. That'll be a question we'll take to the mailing list, and also interested in any discussion here on those questions. Alex, go ahead, please.
Just very briefly, having implemented an ARDA prototype recently, I really like getting rid of JCards, and so I support this work to be forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. Glad to hear it. Any other questions or comments for Gavin? So thanks, Gavin and Mario. We'll certainly look to bring the question to the group here about adopting this work and moving forward with it. Okay, next up. We have internationalized email addresses. And I have a presentation here for that. Dimitri, are you with us and ready to go? Good, I see you there in the queue. Let me get this full screen here for you. And yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Oh, wonderful. Next slide, please. First of all, some words for background. The email address internalization was specified in a set of RFCs 6530 to 6533. They are in this or that stage of deployment now. The main feature of this set of standards is that they allow non-ASCII left part of the email addresses. But anyway, a lot of protocols still refer to the old syntaxes of email addresses, and it means that if we want to implement the EAI addresses, it requires explicit protocol changes. For example, RFC 8399 introduced such changes into certification, into X509 certification profile. Next slide, please. The intention of my work is support of such addresses in the EPP protocol. These addresses should be first-class objects, not a secondary one. These addresses should also be supported in all the objects, in all the EPP objects that have email addresses as an attribute. For example, such objects are EPP contact, EPP organization, and there are some EPP extensions that also use email addresses as attributes. Next slide, please. So we have more than one possible implementation approaches. Currently, the XML schema allows EA addresses, and there are at least two major registry vendors, Tang and Newstars, that silently allow to provide non-ASCII email address via EPP. We also can define an EPP extension. Currently, in the current version of the draft, it's done this way via placeholder. It's similar to RFC 8807 login security extension. We can also allow such addresses implicitly when we indicate support of this syntax in login on login process, and we can have replacement marker element to show that we have non-ASCII email address. Anyway, seems reasonable that we should indicate support of this syntax via new XML namespace. Next slide, please. So it's not enough to change a protocol, we also need to change documents. Formally, it's technically possible to treat RFC 6530 as an update to RFC 5322. But there is a consensus on the list that here be dragons. This approach means that we should have optional SMTP extension to indicate the non-ASCII email support, and that's why this set of RFC does not supersede the earlier specifications. We can update RFCs 5733 and 8543 just to say that the email syntax now should refer to RFC 6530, not to 5322. And we also can specify via a separate document, which is current draft, via EPP extension option. There was a fruitful discussion on the mailing list. All these options were raised. Many thanks to James Gold and Scott Hollenbeck for their patience and their efforts. So I think we should discuss it now, how to deal with this document. Thanks.
Thanks, Dmitry. We already have a couple of people queued up here, so let's jump right in. Alex, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Dimitri, for the work. Jim, can you go back to, like, I think 2 slides up to the sorry, the following one. Sorry. Yes, exactly. I mean, Dimitri, you made an interesting point during the presentation. You said we can add an EPP extension, but I have never heard we need to. Yeah, and I think you answered that in the first line of your presentation. I don't see any reason why we would not allow EAI in the standard email attributes of the EPP contact. And if a server does not support it, they would return a 2306 parameter policy error in EPP explaining that it's not possible, and that's it. I, quite frankly, maybe I missed something, but I don't see that there's much value added here besides like pushing yet another EPP extension on top of the registry and registrars that they need to support. I don't see the value.
I agree that it's one of the reasonable approaches. But I don't. I published it as an option because all this option should be discussed. Without consensus, we anyway can't move ahead.
Okay, Jim Gould, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Actually, I can help answer Alex's comments as well. Is the fact that, yeah, the XML schema does support internationalized email addresses, but there is no signaling whatsoever in EPP at this point that would indicate that servers do in fact support internationalized email addresses. So to me, it seems like having a simple EPP extension would be the better route to go to be at least provide that signaling. And also, I believe that it's better to have some explicit XML to indicate the intent of the client, that they are passing internationalized email addresses for a specific object, whether it's a contact or an organization or one of the proprietary extensions that are out there. So of the options that are on this slide, I personally would prefer the replacement marker element out of those options. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Any comment, Dimitri, or should we go on to Scott?
We can go on discussing.
Go ahead, Scott.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Scott Hollenbeck here. And I know I'm probably channeling Alex a little bit here. But I think, part of the issue here is not really about the XML. It's that a lot of implementations have another layer of processing that is problematic, like a regular expression parser, or for example, that's used to look at the left side of an email address and make sure that it conforms to the syntax specified in the current normative references. And so I think we do need some kind of a signaling mechanism, between the client and the server to indicate support for something that would do something different in terms of validating the local part. So I'm definitely not a fan of going back and trying to update the core EPP RFCs, for example. I mean, this is the whole reason we have an extension mechanism, so we could add capabilities like this without updating these core specs. And so if we decide that we want to do this, I definitely prefer the idea of coming up with an extension, new XML namespace, and some type of a signaling mechanism so that people and clients and servers know that you need to do something different here, to allow non-ASCII characters in the local part of an email address.
Thanks, Scott. I'll just speak for myself and comment quickly that I wonder sometimes why people have make any business of checking the local parts. Should be allowed to be whatever the user wanted it to be. But I do get usability concerns. We like to help the user make sure they do the right thing. John Kang, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Because EI is currently in deploying in many email service providers such as Microsoft, Google, and Apple. So for some local countries in China and India and Arab countries all have deploy EAI service. So some country, some users or registrants need a EAI address. So I think we need such extension, maybe an EPP extension to have include EAI address. So I think it will be good for the future. That's my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Chang. And Jim Gold, you're going to get the last word here, and then we have to move on.
One other point, Scott already brought up about the fact that it's not an XML issue, but there is an issue on the server side and the fact that how the data is stored, because the domain part could be Unicode, but the local part could be UTF-8, and pretty much the ability for the server to support storing that UTF-8 is important from a signaling perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Dimitri, closing comments?
Yeah, closing comment. So I hope that this document will be adopted in this or that form, and I hope that it will be possible to get some consensus of what approach is preferable for most of us. Thanks.
Thanks, Dimitri. I think the question for the working group is, based on this discussion, there's some question as to whether there is something to do here. So part of adopting it for us to think about here, we'll come to that question, is do we believe that there's work to be done here, since one of the options was to do nothing. So we do need to think about whether we want to focus on the signaling mechanism, and then we can talk about the way in which to do that. So I just want to put that out there for the working group to keep that in mind as we go forward. Tom Harrison or George Michelson, I'm not sure which one of you is going to do the presentation. Are you ready to go? And Tom, you have your mic off, so
Yep.
Over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Next slide, please. So this is a really short document that defines a way for a server to indicate to a client that when it's going to redirect something and it knows something about the resource that's been requested, then it will include that information in the body of the response. We have a few different use cases here. Two of them are the ones that are motivating this work, and the other two are things we think may be useful for some people. So the first one is when the redirector has useful, less specific information. So for us, we delegate large blocks to national registries, and then they make delegations out of those blocks to their own account holders. Currently, if somebody does an RDAP query, they'll get information back about those smaller delegations, but it can be useful to know about the delegation that we made to the national registry as well. The second case is when the redirector conforms to an external profile. If the client wants responses that conform to that profile and is happy to live with the less specific information that the redirector has, then they have options in that space. And that's useful for us because we, the regional registries, are working on an RDAP response profile, but it can be tricky in some cases to mandate compliance from the registries we delegate resources to. So this gives options to clients in that respect. The third use case is when the redirector and the target have differing information about the resource, so the client can combine the two responses to get a fuller picture of what's going on. And the fourth is similar to the second one in that if the target is unavailable and the client is willing to live with the less specific information, then they can fall back onto that. Next slide, please. The first question is whether this is even permitted. It's kind of unusual to return a substantive body in an HTTP redirect. The first document is 7231, HTTP semantics and content. For all the codes that are relevant to RDAP, so that's 301, 302, 303, and 307, this document has text along the lines of a server will usually or ought to include HTML with a link to the target resource. But none of that text is normative, and there's also no text that says, for example, don't return substantive content in a redirect. So it appears to be okay as against this document. Next slide, please. The second relevant document is 7480, which is the RDAP HTTP one. This one's a little bit more interesting because it clearly has in mind a model for RDAP where there's a single answer to every query. A server either answers or it doesn't answer or it redirects. However, there is, well, in a way, this isn't really returning the answer. It's returning information that's related to the answer. So we think it's distinguishable from the current text in the document. And there's also nothing normative here that would prevent returning this body, but it's an arguable issue for this one. Next slide, please. The document as it stands doesn't have any client signaling. If a server supports this, then it always returns the content that it has if it's redirecting. There are two reasons for this. The first one is that when you have a chain of redirects, there's no need for each server to pass on the signal. And the second is that without signaling, this is all just a property of the response, and it might be possible to skip the IETF process and just register this as an RDAP extension. Next slide. Some related work is the entity ID to RDAP server document, which was presented by Marc Blanchet at IETF 104. That document had in mind a model where the RDAP server that was responding to a query could include a pointer to another server that would provide additional information. And that was motivated by the thin domain registry use case, where the registry would return some information about the resource, but also include a pointer to the registrar who would have some other information. So that explicitly addressed the idea of having the client combine two responses into one, but there wasn't much discussion after that was presented. Next slide, please. So apart from the question, whether this is a good idea, we have a few issues we'd like feedback on. The first one is, can this be registered as an extension? At least based on the text of the relevant documents, it appears to be okay, but we're sort of a little bit cautious because of how this is a little bit different from how RDAP is sort of put together as a single answer model. So it would be interesting to know what people thought about that. Whether this is useful in the domain name space, presumably not, but if anybody is thinking about delegating to a domain name holder so they can answer queries for subdomains, that would be interesting. And the last one is whether this should have client signaling for some reason. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions or comments from anyone? So the ask again here is about whether or not the working group wants to adopt this work and consider moving forward with it. And Tom, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If nobody has any issue with this being registered as an extension, then we can just do that. So, yeah.
Well, the question would be whether you want it to be a standard or not. Extensions, can just be registered by anyone. Specification required. It just gets expert review, and then it goes forward. But if you're thinking it ought to be a standard extension and be on the standards track, then it would need to come into the working group. So, Tom?
Yeah. What we're interested in is if anybody had any concerns about this being registered as an extension, basically.
Okay. So you're not actually necessarily requesting working group adoption. That's fine. Alex, go ahead, please.
Quite explicitly, I have no concerns about it. I think it's useful. Please go ahead and register it via the standard RDAP extension mechanism.
Thanks, Alex. Gavin, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry. I may have missed this in this presentation, but are there other regional registries where this is a requirement, and are there going to be multiple implementations of this at the highest level, at the regional internet registry level?
As far as I know, the only two registries that delegate to sub-registries within their regions are us and LACNIC. So yeah, I'm not sure if the others have plans to do any delegation.
Gavin, I assume that's an old hand. Okay, any other questions or comments for anyone? All right. Then with that, let's go back to our chair slides here. I believe that takes us through the new work adoption requests. You know, these are just opportunities for the working group to continue to move forward. Some new issues have come up. And so this is the perfect opportunity to move into a discussion of our milestones and what work we do have on our list here and what all of that means. So this is just a quick picture of what our milestones currently look like. Just so that people can remember, the RDAP reverse search and the registry maintenance and federated authentication for the RDAP are still there on our milestone list. You can see that the RDAP reverse search is woefully behind. So we certainly ought to consider moving forward that particular milestone date if we're going to pick and continue that work. That's already working group work, and it's already on our list here. The next four up there have check marks by them, and that's because they are imminently or already, you know, in the queue to be published. They're going to move off of our milestone list imminently here, and so we don't need to worry about us being full at the moment. And then I observe here for completeness that the simple registration reporting, in fact, does not actually have a milestone listed yet. And so I just, speaking for myself, I put a suggestion there for a milestone date. I would ask that the federated authentication as a chair ask forward that we probably need to push that one forward again. We've been carrying that, waiting for, you know, some work to start in ICANN, you know, some interoperability testing and work there to start to move that forward. Although, as Scott noticed earlier in our meeting here today, maybe we have a different motivation for moving forward with that work. Nonetheless, we do have to consider moving that milestone forward. As a last reminder here, and then we'll see what discussion we get from the working group on this. In general, we've always kind of had this model of approximately 7 work items on our list at a time. And that's approximately, you know, 3 work items on the RDAP side, 3 work items on the registry side, and then, you know, we have an extra one that could be on either side. The federated authentication has been kind of filling that extra one slot. So, you know, of the work items that have been proposed, I think the numbers work out in our favor here in terms of taking them on. But nonetheless, there's a priority question, which we'll decide as part of milestone dates. So that's just something to keep in mind as we work out what we want to do here and where to go. So let me first go back over to Antoine here, who you want to jump in here about the milestone lists. And then folks, if you want to say anything in the you know, jump in for discussion here and add any comments about what to do here going forward. Any final comments about what work to adopt or not adopt or status of anything? Antoine?
Well, Jim, you already said everything that I wanted to say too. You know, we have slots available and people can suggest new work. The process we do this, of course, is that we can discuss it here, but the request will be made on the mailing list. And please make sure that when you want to have a document adopted, please let the chairs know. We will issue a formal call for adoption on the mailing list for the documents where the decision will be made. But I'm happy to have any sort of discussion on which direction we want to go. Does anyone have any suggestions?
Alex, go ahead, please.
Given how small our working group is, I'm wondering whether it would be more efficient to like concentrate on a smaller number of documents at a time and to get them through in like a shorter period of time, rather than like keeping 7 documents open. I mean, it's just a consideration. It's essentially the same that we are trying to do in my team. That we have the feeling that addressing less issues at the same time leads to shorter queue completion time. So I'm unsure, but typically I tend towards less items, but completing them in a shorter time frame. Maybe then we can have shorter periods between milestones in the first place. Yeah, if we address something. For example, if we like say, okay, the only thing we want to achieve until March 2021 is the RDAP search and the simple registration reporting, we might probably make that. Yeah.
Yes, and the question, of course, Alex, is the 4 items that have been brought up to the working group now. I think they will all start asking for adoption, but work is being done on these issues anyway, regardless of whether we put it on our milestone list or not. It's just the formal process of adopting it to the working group and to set milestones for it. Do we have another remark from James? James, go ahead.
Well, before Jim goes, just to add something to that, I think this working group has always struggled with whether or not, with the fact that there's only a few of us. I think, Alex, whether or not we take documents on board one at a time and work them forward is really only an administrative difference. With take all the documents on board, at least label them as working group documents, and you set the milestone list out so that you order them in the way in which you're going to do them. So in theory, you only work on them one at a time. But again, as you say, whoever the working group wants to do it, we've sort of taken the approach so far that we tend to take them on and then try to move them forward a little bit at a time. But whatever we think we want to try is certainly what we'll do on our side as chairs. So yeah, so now over to you, Jim.
Say that having a mix of drafts like RDAP, EPP, and data format drafts helps. So you would want to have them all in RDAP or all EPP or to be able to have it scale. Because I think there's different folks in the working group that are focused in different areas. So.
Right. Thanks, Jim. That's a good point too. One of the reasons for having multiple documents in play at the same time is because, yeah, we're a small group, but 1 or 2 people, will typically work on each document, and there's not a lot of overlap there in that as far as progressing work is concerned. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. Another work mode that I've seen in other working groups is that as soon as a document is being requested to adopt it, the working group chairs actually ask the crowd, I will take 5 names of people who are committing to work on that. That has proved successful, though, in a little bit larger working groups. I'm afraid that if we do that here, it might be the same 5 names on each of the drafts in the first place, so it doesn't change a lot. So, but it might be might be a way to ask people not only to provide a document shepherd as soon as the document is adopted, but also provide a set of like a core team that actually works on the document and is really interested in getting the work forward.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I know that when we started this working group, we tried this. Other working groups already they always asked for about 5 people who wanted to work on a document. We tried this at the beginning with 3, but we didn't always get a response where the authors still wanted to progress their work. So yes, we can certainly ask that during the adoption process, and we always ask the question. The question is, what do we do when we set a limit of 5 and we get 4? Do we then reject the adoption of the document?
Technically, yes, unless you like step forward and say, okay, I'll work on it as well. Yeah. So, but it's not an actual work organization scheme. It's more like gauging the attention of people.
Yeah.
It's a
Okay,
voting.
so we take that into consideration that while adopting a document, we need to at least to have a certain number of reviewers and people who are willing to work on the document. Thank you very much. You have any remarks on that, Jim?
No, I was thinking about reading out Alex's comment in the chat room, but I'll let folks refer to that themselves. I'm enjoying that. Thanks, Alex. Okay. I think that brings us to perhaps the most exciting part of our agenda with, about 5 minutes left in our meeting time. Any other business? Don't all rush to the mic at once. I think this has been a really good meeting, at least for me. I'll just offer some thanks to everyone. We've had a particularly productive meeting this time around, very solid agenda, good technical discussion. Very much appreciate that. Thanks to everyone who jumped in here to join us. We have some actions to proceed with, and we'll take a number of different things to the mailing list here about the future of a few documents and what to go forward. So just a thank you for me under any other business. I don't have anything else to add here for that. Antoine, over to you to take us out.
Well, I don't have any closing remarks too, except what you already said. I want to thank everybody for joining this meeting, and we will continue the discussion on the mailing list. And I also hope that next time there won't be any virtual meeting, but a real face-to-face meeting. And thank you to Jay for already proposing the T-shirt for that. So with this, I will close this session, and I want to thank everybody and see you next time somewhere in spring. Thanks all.
We're adjourned.
Thank you. Jim, Antoine, do you want me to do anything about the special about the meeting minutes that I took? Is it fine?
We are probably going to copy them now and paste them into. Yeah.
They are not perfect formatting wise, but I'll see what I can do. I think I've.
Okay, that's fine. We'll copy them out of Comid and post them up. We'll post them to the list and also post them into the materials proceedings. Thank you very much, Alex.
Perfect.
Certainly call that out for
Thank
all
you,
the
guys.
notations.
I think that was an excellent meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. And Antoine, I assume you're probably going to grab a copy of these too. I'm just going to grab a copy here.
Yeah, exactly.
I just realized I wasn't ready to put the notes somewhere. I'm trying to make a document to put them in.
Well, I just copied everything.
Yeah, I did a copy. I
think you can turn off the recording now, right? Oh, we
Wanna
cannot
paste them into
turn off the
something.
recording. Perhaps we should
There we go.
open a new session, Jim.
Okay, I have now, good. I made my own copy of them and pasted them into something, which is good. So I guess we're good. So we'll see you. You and I will see each other on Monday.
I have an issue with that, so I'll ping you personally.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.
Okay, bye.